Everything in life is complicated. Every story, every situation you're in is complicated. People are complicated.
Lara Logan stood at the very front lines of global conflict, a fearless journalist who risked everything to bring the world raw, unfiltered truth. From the war zones of Afghanistan to the heart of political storms in Washington, her voice carried authority, her presence demanded respect, and her stories shaped the way millions understood history as it unfolded. But behind the courage and the sharp reporting, Lara Logan carried with her a personal battle that the world never fully knew. Now, at 54 years old, she has finally broken her silence. What she revealed is not just the story of a journalist's career, it is the story of survival, resilience, and the devastating cost of seeking truth in some of the world's darkest corners. For years, Logan faced physical danger, unrelenting criticism, and a media landscape eager to elevate her one day and tear her down the next. But the most harrowing chapter of her life was something far more personal, an ordeal she had kept private. Shielded from the cameras and headlines until now, her revelation has stunned those who followed her career closely, raising new questions about what it truly means to live in constant pursuit of truth, regardless of the cost. This is not just the story of a journalist. It is the story of a woman who endured the unimaginable, who wrestled with silence and stigma, and who has now chosen to share her truth, no matter how heartbreaking or difficult it may be. Long before Lara Logan became a household name, she was simply a young South African woman with an unshakable determination to tell the truth. Born in Durban in 1971, Logan grew up during a period of intense political and social unrest. From an early age, she understood the power of information, the way stories could shape perspectives and influence entire societies. That understanding would set her on a path that would ultimately take her far from home, into the very heart of global conflict. Her career began modestly, working as a reporter and producer in her home country. But Logan's ambition quickly pushed her beyond the local newsroom. She wasn't content with reading headlines or reporting from safe distances. She wanted to be where history was unfolding, on the ground, in the middle of the action. That drive led her to join international outlets, and soon her reporting began to attract attention for its depth, its fearlessness, and her refusal to soften the truth. By the early 2000s, Logan had become one of the most recognizable foreign correspondents on television. Working for CBS News, she covered some of the world's most dangerous assignments, from the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 to the war in Iraq just 2 years later. She wasn't just covering stories. She was living them, often putting herself in extreme danger to get first-hand accounts. Viewers who tuned in to watch her reports could sense her passion and authenticity. Unlike polished anchors sitting safely behind studio desks, Logan was there, standing on dusty battlefields, her voice steady even as gunfire rattled in the distance. But with that rise came incredible pressure. War reporting is unlike any other kind of journalism. It requires not only skill and composure, but also the willingness to face danger daily. Logan endured long stretches away from her family, nights spent in makeshift shelters, and the constant knowledge that one wrong step could cost her life. Yet she pressed forward, driven by what she described as a responsibility to give voice to the voiceless, the civilians trapped in wars they didn't start, the soldiers risking their lives, and the countless stories that would otherwise go untold. Her work quickly earned her praise across the globe. She became known not only for her courage but also for her ability to humanize war. Instead of focusing solely on military strategy or political leaders, Logan often highlighted the human suffering that wars left in their wake. This approach made her a trusted figure, someone audiences felt connected to. She wasn't just reporting the news, she was giving people a window into realities most would never see. Behind the recognition, however, was a woman carrying immense personal weight. The constant exposure to violence and tragedy began to leave scars that were not always visible. Logan admitted in later years that the hardest part of her work was not the danger itself, but the emotional toll. Witnessing suffering day after day and knowing that her role was to report, not to intervene. Still, she pushed on, unwilling to allow fear to dictate her choices. This resolve made her one of the few female journalists consistently on the front lines of war, breaking barriers in an industry still dominated by men. She wasn't interested in fitting into expectations. She was there to do the work, and she did it with unmatched dedication. By her early 40s, Lara Logan was at the peak of her profession. She was respected by colleagues, admired by audiences, and decorated with numerous awards. To the outside world, it appeared she had everything: a successful career, influence, and recognition. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. The very qualities that made her such a fearless journalist were also leading her into situations that would forever change her life. As Lara Logan's star rose higher, no one could have predicted the storm that was about to come. The risks she had taken for years were catching up to her, and the cost of truth-telling was about to become devastatingly personal. By 2011, Lara Logan had established herself as one of the most trusted correspondents in American journalism. When the Arab Spring erupted, she was on the ground, documenting a historic movement that captured the world's attention. Cairo, Egypt, became the center of global headlines as millions of protesters filled Tahrir Square, demanding change and defying decades of authoritarian rule. For Logan, this was exactly where she felt she belonged, right in the middle of history, telling the story as it unfolded. But what happened to her in Cairo on February 11, 2011, was something no assignment could have prepared her for. That night, as crowds gathered to celebrate the resignation of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, Logan and her team moved through the square, attempting to capture the raw emotion of the moment. The atmosphere was electric, filled with chanting, shouting, and an overwhelming sense of release. Yet beneath the celebration lurked a dangerous volatility. Logan became separated from much of her crew, surrounded by a mob that grew increasingly aggressive. In the chaos, she was attacked and assaulted by a large group of men. The violence was brutal, terrifying, and relentless. For nearly half an hour, she endured one of the darkest ordeals imaginable before being rescued by a group of women and soldiers who intervened. The world would later learn what happened, but in those immediate moments, very little was known. CBS News released only a brief statement confirming that Logan had been attacked while reporting in Cairo and was recovering in the United States. For the public, it was shocking. For Logan, it was life-altering. The attack was not just a violation of her physical safety, it was a direct assault on everything she had worked for. For years, Logan had built her reputation on courage, on the idea that no story was too dangerous, no assignment too great a risk. Now, she was forced to confront the reality that even her determination could not shield her from the cruelty of violence. In the weeks following the assault, Logan faced a new kind of battle. While her body began to heal, the emotional and psychological scars ran far deeper. Post-traumatic stress consumed her days and nights. She described being haunted by memories of that night, unable to sleep, struggling to regain a sense of normalcy. The fearless journalist, who had once stood tall in war zones, now found herself fighting an invisible war within her own mind. For months, Logan remained largely silent, retreating from the spotlight. When she eventually spoke publicly about her ordeal, it was with remarkable candor. She refused to allow the stigma of sexual assault to silence her. In interviews, she admitted the details were painful, but she believed that speaking out was necessary, not just for herself, but for countless women around the world who had experienced similar violence in silence. Her openness was both courageous and heartbreaking, reminding people that even the strongest voices could carry unimaginable pain. The attack also changed the way she approached her work. While her commitment to truth remained unshaken, she acknowledged that the experience had forever altered her perception of safety, of vulnerability, and of the human cost of her profession. She had always known that journalism could be dangerous, but this was different. It was no longer about the risks of bullets or bombs. It was about a violence that struck at her very identity as a woman and as a professional. For Lara Logan, that night in Cairo was the dividing line in her story. Everything before it spoke to ambition, fearlessness, and professional triumph. Everything after it spoke to survival, resilience, and the painful process of rebuilding a life forever changed by trauma. Her revelation years later, at age 54, carried the weight of that history. It was not just about reliving what happened, but about reclaiming her own voice in a story that had once nearly silenced her. After Cairo, Lara Logan's life changed in ways the public could not fully see. Though she returned to journalism, the shadows of that night lingered. The assault had not only left her with physical trauma, but also with deep psychological wounds that would take years to confront. For a journalist used to carrying herself with confidence and composure, admitting vulnerability was never easy. Yet Logan had no choice. The pain was impossible to ignore. In the months and years that followed, she spoke about her struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares haunted her. Loud noises could trigger panic. Crowded spaces felt suffocating, a reminder of the mob that had once surrounded her. These invisible scars were compounded by the pressure of working in an industry that rarely paused to acknowledge human suffering behind the stories. The same determination that once carried her through war zones now became a double-edged sword. She wanted to keep going, but the cost was higher than ever. The attack in Cairo also brought a wave of unwanted attention. While many people supported her courage, others subjected her to cruel judgment and scrutiny. Some questioned her decision to be in the square that night, as if the blame lay with her rather than her attackers. For Logan, this reaction was nearly as painful as the ordeal itself. In interviews, she admitted that the criticism deepened her trauma, reinforcing the sense of isolation survivors of assault often feel. She chose to speak out anyway, believing that silence only empowers stigma. Professionally, Logan tried to resume her career with the same intensity, but new challenges arose. Her reporting on controversial topics, especially national security and foreign policy, sparked heated debates. At times, her work drew harsh criticism from colleagues and rivals, putting her under an even harsher spotlight. In 2013, a report she presented on the Benghazi attack came under fire for inaccuracies, leading CBS to issue a public apology and suspend her. For a journalist who had built her reputation on credibility, the fallout was devastating. The combination of personal trauma and professional backlash forced Logan to confront a difficult reality. She could no longer separate her private struggles from her public image. Her career, once defined by bravery and respect, now carried the weight of controversy. Yet she refused to walk away completely. For Logan, journalism was more than a career, it was her identity. Stepping back felt like surrender, and surrender was never in her vocabulary. During this period, Logan leaned heavily on her family. Her husband, Joseph Burkett, and her children became her foundation, offering stability when the rest of her world felt uncertain. She often spoke about how motherhood gave her purpose beyond the newsroom, reminding her that while she was a journalist, she was also a mother and a wife. This balance, though fragile, gave her strength to face each new day. At the same time, Logan began to reframe her public image. She shifted toward long-form interviews and independent projects, stepping away from the rigid structures of mainstream media. This allowed her to take ownership of her voice again, free from the corporate systems that had once both elevated and constrained her. It also gave her the space to explore stories that mattered deeply to her. Stories about truth, accountability, and the human cost of conflict. But even as she rebuilt, the memory of Cairo lingered. In candid moments, Logan admitted that she still carried fear, doubt, and a lingering sense of fragility. Yet she also carried determination. She believed her survival gave her a responsibility, not only to continue telling stories, but to speak for those who had endured violence without a platform. By the time she reached her early 50s, Lara Logan's career no longer looked like the seamless rise it once did. It was messy, complicated, and scarred. But in those scars lay a different kind of strength. Her battles were no longer just about surviving war zones or chasing breaking news. They were about reclaiming her life, her voice, and her sense of purpose in a world that had nearly broken her. Her revelation at 54 was the culmination of years of struggle, resilience, and reflection. For Logan, speaking openly was not about reliving pain. It was about finally owning it. As Lara Logan steps into this later stage of her life, Her decision to reveal the truth about her journey has reshaped the way the world views not only her career, but also her humanity. For years, audiences associated her name with danger, courage, and bold journalism. She was the woman who walked into battlefields with nothing but a microphone and the will to tell a story. Yet now people see her in a different light, not just as a fearless reporter, but as a survivor who bore scars both visible and hidden, someone whose strength was tested far beyond the camera's reach. Her revelation has forced many to reconsider the price paid by those who dedicate their lives to journalism. The profession often celebrates bravery, but it rarely acknowledges the lingering toll it exacts on those who live through trauma. For Logan, admitting her pain was not a moment of weakness. It was perhaps the most powerful statement she had ever made. It stripped away the myth of invincibility that often surrounds war correspondents and replaced it with something more human, more relatable, and ultimately, more inspiring. The response from the public has been mixed, yet deeply significant. Many have expressed admiration, offering messages of solidarity and gratitude for her honesty. Survivors of trauma have found courage in her words, recognizing pieces of their own pain reflected in her story. Others have criticized her, questioning motives or timing. But for Logan, the decision to speak out was never about public opinion. It was about reclaiming her narrative, ensuring that her truth was told on her terms, not left for others to speculate or distort. Professionally, her future remains uncertain. The media world she once dominated has evolved, and while some networks may shy away from controversy, others see in her story a voice that still matters, perhaps more than ever. Logan herself has hinted that her work is not finished. She may never again chase stories from the middle of war zones, but she continues to speak, write, and appear in spaces where honesty is valued above spectacle. Her legacy, after all, was never built on silence, but on the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. What makes her revelation so powerful is not just the details of what she endured, but the courage it took to finally say it out loud. At 54, Logan understands that silence can be as heavy as the events themselves, and breaking it is the only way to move forward. In speaking out, she has offered a roadmap for others, proof that vulnerability does not erase strength, but instead redefines it. Looking back on her life, one cannot separate Lara Logan the journalist from Lara Logan the survivor. Both identities are entwined, feeding into one another, shaping the woman she has become. She reported on human suffering and injustice with unmatched intensity because she understood more than most what it meant to endure hardship. And now, by finally sharing her own struggles, she has deepened that legacy, turning personal pain into a broader lesson for the world. As her story continues to unfold, one thing is certain: Lara Logan will not be remembered solely for her years on screen, nor for the headlines that once tried to define her. Instead, she will be remembered as someone who risked everything in pursuit of truth, both on the battlefield and within herself. And in doing so, she has reminded us that the most important stories are not always those we report to the world, but those we finally learn to tell about ourselves.